joined me for the next Bible study. I appreciate you. Today, I'm actually going to keep going. We already went from Noah to Abram. Then we did from Abram to Abraham. Then we went from Abraham to his son Isaac, his two sons. And then we went from Jacob and down into his 12 sons. Jacob was known as Israel by the time we got done with our study last time. And so out of the 12 children of Israel, we're going to follow Joseph. You know how we like to do in this Bible study? I'm going to break down Joseph's name by Hebrew. They say that Joseph's name means to add, but we don't want just that meaning of Joseph. We want to go a little further. And so from right to left, it's Yod Samech Peh, which is pronounced Joseph. But whenever we break down the meaning of each letter and put it in the correct order to translate what is the further meaning of Joseph, let's break it down. That the work or the hand will support the mouth. So basically what he does will support what he says. But more importantly, the hand of God, that Yod, that first letter on the right, is the hand of God. It's the work of God. So really the work of God will support what God said. In other words, that told Abraham, I'm going to bless you with this whole land that you're traveling in. And also that your children will serve in a land that's not theirs for 400 years. And so how are they going to get there? Well, they're going to get there through Joseph. And Joseph is going to be that man that starts to show that the work of God will be supported even by what Joseph says. So even by what Joseph says will be supported by the work of God. Also that the work or the handiwork of God through Joseph will be the threshold. That will be the threshold, that Joseph is the threshold from one way of life through his lineage of people into the next phase of who they are and what they're going to go through. And we can get into a little bit more of that in a little bit. So, but Joseph, when we break it down for real, it's that the work will be supported by the mouth. The hand will be supported by the mouth. That what is done will be supported by what he said. So Genesis 37, verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a coat of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and they couldn't speak peaceably to him. Then Joseph says in verse 6, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. And then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around, and they bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? And so they hated him even more for his dream and his words. Now remember, Israel has 12 sons at this point. So 11 of these guys hate Joseph. And now they really hate him. So verse 9 says, then he dreamed still another dream. And he told it to his brothers and said, look, I've dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. Remember, he's got 11 brothers. So there they go, bowing down to him. And so he told it to his father and his brothers. So his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept it in his mind. Also, I want to point out that in this, there's also 12 major constellations, and that the Bible does say that the 11 stars bowed down to him. So it almost makes me wonder if he's talking about the 11 constellations, which also kind of represent his brothers, etc., etc. Verse 21, come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say that some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. And Reuben heard it. Now remember, Reuben is Joseph's brother, one of the 11. And he heard it, and he delivered Joseph out of their hands, saying, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and don't lay a hand on him. He's the flesh of our flesh, the blood of our blood. We probably shouldn't kill him. Let's just leave him out here. And so basically, a quick breakdown, his brothers settle on selling him. There are some Ishmaelites that were traveling on their way to Egypt. And so they decided they were going to sell Joseph to these Ishmaelites. And if you go back a couple of Bible studies and watch, you'll see the breakdown of Ishmael being the brother of Isaac, Ishmael and Isaac. So really, Isaac had Jacob, Jacob had Joseph, so he's being sold to his distant relatives. So his own family is buying him for 20 shekels of silver on their way to Egypt. And so they rip off Joseph's coat of colors, and the brothers cover it in blood from a goat, and then they give it to their father Israel to declare that Joseph was dead. And Israel mourns for a while because his favorite son, he believes, is dead. And you can almost see a parallel here that's happening. A man is sold for some shekels of silver, and his coat is ripped off as they cover it in blood. You know, this is almost very parallel to what happens to Jesus. He gets sold, they tear off his clothes, you know, and then he's left for dead. So we're starting to see some parallels of what's happening just in this family already. And there they go, off to Egypt, selling Joseph into slavery. Now, when Joseph gets into Egypt, he gets sold to Potiphar. And Potiphar is the captain of the guard of the Pharaoh. So he's no regular Joe. Potiphar has a great house, and he sets Joseph over the whole household. He starts to trust Joseph. He treats him fairly well. And Joseph has it pretty good, considering he was just in a pit and his own family sold him into slavery. Slavery could have went in any direction for him. But by the will of God, even when people were casting doubt upon him, shame upon him, trying to kill him, he ended up being exalted in a sense. And this is the first time he gets exalted. The Bible says that a humble man will be exalted, but a man that exalts himself will be humbled. And so while he's in Potiphar's house, Joseph is exposed to Potiphar's wife too, because she's always around. And the Bible says that Joseph was good looking. He was a handsome fellow, and he was smart, and he was over the house. And, you know, while Potiphar's out at work and doing his thing, it kind of gives this sense that probably Joseph is the man of the house. I don't know what her problem was, but she tries to sleep with Joseph. Verse 16 says, so she kept the garment with her when she tried to come on to him. It says she kept the garment with her until his master came home. Then she spoke to Potiphar with words like these, saying that the Hebrew servant whom you brought us came in to mock me, or he came in to rape me. And so it happened. And as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and he fled outside. And so after this happens, Potiphar throws Joseph into prison. But he's put into prison with the king's prisoners. You know, you can't mix royal prisoners with the regular common folk prisoners, because royal prisoners have been exposed to the layout of palaces. They've been exposed to the layout of the captain of the guard's house, for example, in Joseph's case. They've been exposed to information. I mean, just all kinds of things. So you got to keep those guys in a different group. But he ended up being favored by the guard of the prison, and he was made the trustee over the prison. So everything was pretty much under Joseph's watch again. Joseph's over everything again. In the prison with him was the king's butler and the baker. So basically the Pharaoh's butler and the baker are in prison with Joseph. And the Bible counts this moment where the butler and the baker, they're having these dreams that are terrifying them. And they're so upset because there's no one able to interpret their dreams. You know, they're used to being on the outside with all the wise men and the magicians and the soothsayers and the mediums and the psychics and whatever else was going on in Egypt at that time. So Joseph, it occurs to him to tell them, Genesis 40, don't interpretations belong to God? And so they continue to tell them their dreams. And the butler has a dream about grapes that are growing on 3 vines, and that they're growing so tight and compacted together that they're budding up and they're just like overflowing, and that he makes wine out of them and puts it into the Pharaoh's cup. And then he puts the cup in Pharaoh's hand. That's quite a dream, especially when you're in prison. And yet the Pharaoh's baker, he also has a dream that he's carrying 3 white baskets on top of his head. And as he's walking, there's the bread and all the baked goods at the top. So the bread is at the top, and he has a dream that birds keep flying down and eating all the bread that's in the white baskets that's on his head. Even in today's colloquialisms and in today's terms, when somebody puts some bread on your head, that ain't a good thing. That is not good. And so Joseph starts to tell these men and prophesy to them about their dreams and what does it mean. But he's giving credit to God. Remember, he said, don't interpretations belong to God? After all, God is the one who put the dream inside of you. So his dream interpretation for the butler is that he will be restored to his position as the butler and as the king's cupbearer. And to the baker, he tells him the interpretation of the dream is that he's going to have his head cut off and that he'll be hung on a tree for birds to eat at his flesh. And it comes to pass. But before they leave prison, Joseph tells the butler, hey, I don't belong in prison. I didn't try to touch that girl. Please speak highly of me to the Pharaoh when you go back to his presence. When you get restored by the Pharaoh, please tell him about me. I don't belong here. So here we already see the nature of Joseph's name coming to life, that the work of God will support what he says. That Joseph is giving all the credit to God, especially the interpretations of the dreams that he's been in contact with, and then it gets supported by the work, also the work of God. The people are freed from prison and their dreams are true. So then the Bible goes on to say that some time has passed, and the butler, of course, did not remind Pharaoh of Joseph. He was too busy being excited about his new freedom. But the Pharaoh starts having 2 dreams that start to really freak him out. And the Pharaoh's dreams were this, that there were 7 fat and full cows in the field, grazing like normal. And then 7 emaciated and skinny cows rise up out of the river and consume the fat cows. But they're still emaciated and skinny. And yet he has another dream. He has a dream of 7 heads of wheat rising up full and fat, and then blighted by the east wind. Let's remember that for maybe our next Bible study. Blighted by the east wind, and it brings 7 not so good wheat stalks rising up and basically choking out the good ones. No bueno. No bueno for Pharaoh. And so these dreams start to plague Pharaoh because he can't figure out what they mean. And Genesis 41 verse 8 says, Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men. And Pharaoh told them in his dreams. But there was no one who could interpret them for the Pharaoh. So eventually the butler remembers and he says, hey, there was this guy in prison with us. There was a young Hebrew man with us there, a guard, a servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us. So it happened. The Pharaoh restored me to my office, and he hanged the other man. So in Genesis 41, verse 16, there's a quote. It says, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Because the Pharaoh summons Joseph. He says, yeah, I heard that you're an interpreter of dreams. I heard that you've interpreted these guys' dreams in prison, and it came to pass. So he tells him, no, it's not in me necessarily, that God will give the Pharaoh an answer of peace. And so he tells the Pharaoh that his dreams represent 7 years of plenty. The fat cows and the 7 full heads of wheat represent 7 years of plenty. And that the 7 emaciated cows and the 7 blighted stalks of wheat represent the 7 years of famine that will follow. A famine so great that you won't even be able to remember how much plenty there was. Genesis 41:38. So Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Could we find any other man like this? The Pharaoh is saying, I don't think I've ever met anyone like him. And so the Pharaoh gives Joseph his signet ring, making him second in charge over Egypt. I've also heard it called the vizier. And real quick, in case you don't know what a signet ring is or what it does or what it signifies, it's basically a wax stamp. You ever seen the hot wax poured on an envelope and then they put that stamp on it and it's like an embossed logo, like an official seal? That's what that is. So any official business, it's more like a signature of power. You know, you drop the wax down on it, you put the ring down as the stamp, and you know it's official business. And he gives this to Joseph. What does Joseph do with it? He commissions to build granaries, to store grains and seeds during the 7 years of plenty, to give out as the ration during the 7 years of famine. So he's got a plan. You know, God gave the interpretation of the dream, and Joseph comes up with a plan. And mind you, this isn't the first famine that Egypt has seen, okay? If you remember in our other Bible studies, even whenever Abraham was out walking around, there was a famine. And there was even another famine after that whenever he had Isaac. So apparently this is a common thing, but this was going to be a real serious one. This is going to be 7 years. So when the 7 years of famine approach, all the surrounding countries are forced to go into Egypt for food. Even his brothers and his parents. Remember his dream about the stars and the sun and the moon bowing down before him. And so while he's in Egypt and he builds the granaries and time has passed and the people are coming into the country to buy their grain and to buy their seed. Well, not only that at that time, people were actually selling their land to be taken care of by the system. So not only did Joseph increase the Pharaoh's confidence in him, Joseph actually increased the Pharaoh's wealth by setting up a system that people could buy from him. Also, he increased the Pharaoh's territory because now people are selling their territory to give it to the Pharaoh to be taken care of during this time. And then they could take seed back, try to grow it, and whatever they could grow after this time, then they would sell that back as taxes. So, I mean, a very serious system for wealth and prosperity has been set up right now by Joseph. And it comes to a point to where his brothers need to come down there and he recognizes them. And so he decides he's going to mess with them. He's operating out of a little bit of anger and hate in this moment. And he says, you know what? I think you guys are spies. And they don't recognize Joseph. I think you guys are spies. And they said, no, 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 we're here to get food and we have to take it back. We have a little brother. And then he said, oh, you got a little brother? Produce this little brother to show me you're not a liar. Because, you know, Joseph's thinking, I thought my mom couldn't have kids anymore. What is this they're talking about? So they produced the little brother. And he says, okay, you guys aren't spies. I'm sorry. They all sit down for dinner. And Joseph frames their new little brother to make him seem like a thief, because he wants them to stress out again. Because the last time they had a little brother, they sold him into slavery. And they say, no, please, please don't do this. Don't do this. Our father could never, our father could never handle this again. So Joseph tells them, bring your father to me. Come on, you bring your father to me and let him explain all of this, and we'll see, what's going on. So all this goes down, all this family drama goes down, and eventually we see what happened here. You remember the dream. His sheaf rose above all the other sheaves in the dream, and they have to bow down to him at this point. And all the family drama gets cleared up. Joseph forgives them. And as we see in Genesis 47, the Pharaoh tells Joseph that you should have your father and your brothers come dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. Remember that for our next Bible study as well. Goshen. Goshen is near the Upper Nile on the eastern side of the Delta, in that area. And it's one of the best pieces of the land, as we can see here, that Pharaoh is telling Joseph. He's telling him, bring down your brothers and your father and let them come live down here. This whole family episode has really touched me. And so this right here is the archaeological site of a city called Avaris. Now, Avaris is smack dab in the middle of Goshen. There were other later dynastic Egyptian cities built on top of it. Why is that? Well, we said that Joseph brought his family to live down there, right? And that we'll learn later in a later Bible study that some pharaohs come along and they don't know Joseph. They don't care about the story of Joseph or the history of Joseph or why these foreigners are in their country. They don't care about that. And we'll start to see why Joseph was the man of the threshold, or the work of the threshold, as his name suggests from the beginning of our Bible study today. That they have to be in this land in order for them to be captives and to be put to work in the land that is not their own, like God told Abraham. So this is how they get there. And so the later period of pharaohs, they're not going to respect any of this. They're not going to care about any of it. And it makes sense, because as you go and you study through history, there is a period of Egyptian history called the Hyksos period. The Hyksos, which is a period of rulers in Egypt for about 100 years, maybe a little more, of people who were from the land of Canaan. Well, where did Israel and his 12 sons come down to Egypt from, including Joseph? They came from the land of Canaan. And so history does support it, but at the same time, the enemy has been trying to discredit God's people, God's word, and God's plan all along. So they just cover it up. They put bigger buildings on top of smaller buildings. They put smaller words in place of bigger words. They make book translations not add up completely with the first translation. But they're not going to be able to steal from the work of God. Because in that little city of Avaris, right in the middle of Goshen, they found these statues. That's a guy with a coat of many colors. He was in the tomb. Now, of course, Joseph's coat got ripped off and covered in blood, and they gave it to his dad to signify that he was dead. But don't you think the second in command of all of Egypt could have his favorite coat remade? Or at least something like it, right? And on the statue, you see this little mushroom head here that was kind of cut off. Looks like a mushroom from Super Mario. That's actually thought to be Joseph's head. It was a statue of Joseph that was in his tomb. And I would just want to say there's only one type of person that I know of who can wear an afro. So there is a bit of history and proofing there, right? This man had an afro, and he shaped it like a mushroom because it was the fashion statement at the time. I don't know if I'd wear a mushroom afro. I mean, I'd definitely wear a cool big afro, but I don't know if I'd wear a mushroom style. So they found this in Avaris, right in the middle of Goshen. Now, what is this guy? Who is he, and what is he doing? He's guarding a tomb. This guy is actually guarding the tomb of Joseph. But wait, the body of Joseph was not found in the tomb in Avaris that I just showed you, smack dab in the middle of Goshen. But this is why they never found his body in Avaris, because Exodus 13 says that Moses, and we're not there yet, but next Bible study we will be, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. And he placed the children of Israel under a solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones from here with you. So Joseph was born to Israel, sold into slavery by his brothers. He rose to the second in power by working under the house of the captain of the guard for Potiphar, was thrown in prison, interpreted dreams for the prisoners. He was set free, interpreted dreams for the Pharaoh, saved Egypt from a famine, had a little family drama reality TV series there for a minute, and then brings his whole family to live in the area of Goshen in Egypt, placing his family right where God needs the children of Israel to be, so that God can use them as the chosen people to show God's power during the Exodus. And so Joseph tells them, yeah, surely one day God is going to visit you, and I want you to carry my bones up out of this place. Don't leave me here when you leave. And that's why Joseph's body was not found in the tomb in Avaris in Egypt in the middle of Goshen, because Moses takes him out of Egypt. He doesn't leave him there. And that is the study on Joseph. And it's also the end of the book of Genesis. That closes the curtain on the man of the coat of many colors. And real quick, just as a quick catch me up from our Bible studies previous, let's do a quick lineage check. Noah had Shem, and then came Arphaxad, then came Shelah, then comes Eber. I have Eber in red there because Eber is where the Hebrew comes from. Then comes Peleg. Peleg means division. So I've done some research, and they think that Peleg was actually named a word that meant division because he was around the time that everybody split up in Babel. So remember, everybody's speaking different languages in Babel. So Eber, red guy there, Hebrew. Peleg, division, people spread out. Well, in Hebrew goes somewhere because everybody's spreading out, right? Next is Reu, then Serug, then Nahor, then Terah. Terah is the father of Abraham. Abraham had Isaac. He had another son too, but we're just following this portion for now. Isaac had Esau and Jacob. That's what we went over last time. And then Jacob had 12 sons, and we just followed Joseph. So this is the breakdown of the lineage of how we get from Noah all the way to Joseph. And that sincerely concludes our breakdown overview of Joseph.